Useless soldier. The words exploded across the tribunal like gunfire. My name is Talia Morgan, 34, decorated Navy officer. And that voice belonged to my father, retired Colonel Daniel Morgan. A war hero, a man with more medals than I could count. And in that moment, the man who was trying to tear me down, the tribunal chamber froze. Every uniform turned toward me, every eye. I felt the pressure in my chest, right where the shrapnel still lived under my ribs. I wanted to speak, but I didn't. Instead, I stood. My chair scraped back with a screech. I reached for the buttons on my uniform. One by one, I undid them. No one moved. No one spoke. I peeled off my dress blues, raised my undershirt, and let the silence witness what reports never could. Scars. Deep, jagged, still red, still angry. 2 pieces of metal, foreign, permanent, protruded under my skin. A reminder of a mission no one else survived. Gasps echoed through the room. Admiral Foster stood. "Those scars," he whispered. "My father?" He staggered. The man who once taught me to aim straight couldn't even look me in the eye. I turned to him, my voice calm, controlled. "You call me useless," I said. But I carried 2 wounded men through a jungle full of gunfire, with these wounds bleeding, and I didn't stop. He sank into his chair, small, pale. The courtroom held its breath, and I gave it no release. Just the truth. "You want answers?" I asked. "Then I'll tell you what really happened the night we were sent to die." And I did. Everything. Starting with the mission they said never happened. The one that turned us into data points. The one where silence almost killed us. And where survival was never supposed to be part of the plan. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people meant to protect you, stay with me. Because what comes next isn't just my story. It's a truth too big to stay buried. Subscribe, comment, and remember, sometimes the scars they try to shame you for are the very proof you survived. He called me a liability, unstable, not to be trusted. Those words didn't come from a stranger. They came from my father, and they weren't whispered behind closed doors. They were printed, bold and brutal, on the front page of a military news outlet. Retired Colonel Daniel Morgan. My daughter is obsessed, unfit, and a threat to operational integrity. I stared at the screen in Admiral Foster's office, my face stone still, but something inside me collapsed. He had said it publicly. To the world. To the very system I had broken myself to serve. Foster reached to turn the screen off. "Talia," he said quietly. But I didn't hear him. Not really. All I could hear was my father's voice echoing in my head. A soldier either completes the mission or dies trying. I had completed it. Barely. And I had lived. Apparently, that was the problem. I walked out without a word. The hallways of the base had never felt so cold. Every step sounded louder. Every face turned quicker and looked away faster. I had survived a war zone. But this was colder. Outside, I sat on a bench beneath the flagpole, the same one I'd saluted every morning. I pressed a hand against my ribs, feeling the jagged pressure beneath the skin. The metal fragments never came out. The doctors said it was too risky, so I lived with them. They pulsed under my skin like tiny reminders of a night no one wanted to talk about. Not even the Navy, especially not the Navy. The night I woke up in that hospital, I thought I was alone. No one from command. No father. No medals. Just a nurse, quietly checking monitors. "You're safe now," she said gently. But safe felt like a lie. Because I wasn't. Not from the silence. Not from the truth, trying to claw its way out of me. My chest was wrapped tight, stained with blood that had dried but not forgotten. The pain was sharp, constant. But worse than the pain was the not knowing. No one talked about what had happened. Just vague references to enemy activity and unfortunate casualties. No mention of the backup team that never arrived. No mention of the radio silence. No mention of how my team walked into a coordinated ambush with outdated maps and false intelligence. When I asked questions, the answers came too fast, too clean. "You were lucky. You performed exceptionally. You should be proud." Proud of what? That Kim lost a shoulder and half his blood? That Diaz can't sleep through the night without screaming? That Ruiz's thigh was torn open by shrapnel while command sipped coffee and waited for a report? I wasn't proud. I was pissed and scared. Because I knew something was wrong. And worse, I knew they didn't want me to dig. In the weeks that followed, my name was added to commendation drafts. Exceptional bravery. Exemplary leadership under fire. But when I asked for mission footage, Gone. Logs? Sanitized. Reports? Redacted. And then came the whispers. She shouldn't have survived. Too emotional. Probably cracked under pressure. The same whispers my father would later shout into headlines. But the moment that broke me, it didn't come from them. It came from me. From the moment I stood in front of a mirror alone and lifted my shirt, I traced the scars, ugly, raised, angry things. Not the kind of scars Hollywood turns into symbols. No, these were raw, misshapen, cruel. And underneath, I felt it. The metal, the truth, still buried, still burning. I sat on the cold tile floor and cried. Not because I was weak, but because no one saw the cost. They saw a soldier, a name, a case file, a press release, but not me. There were days I couldn't even sit upright. My ribs screamed every time I breathed too deep, but I forced myself to move, to walk, to train, to act like the story they wrote for me was true. Lieutenant Morgan, battlefield hero. No one knew I spent most nights staring at the ceiling, my fists clenched tight under the blanket, that I couldn't sleep unless the light was on, unless the door was unlocked, just in case. Because it wasn't just the jungle that haunted me, it was the silence that followed. I requested access to the raw mission data. Nothing. I filed an official inquiry. Delayed. I tried contacting the Operations Intel Division myself. They told me, focus on recovery. But I wasn't broken. I wasn't delusional. I was angry. Because I remembered. I remembered everything. The moment our radios died. The missing second team. The eerie stillness before the first shot was fired. The way the ambush felt too perfect, like someone was watching, waiting, and yet no one wanted to ask why. That's when I started digging, quietly, alone. I combed through old drone manifests, compared timestamps, matched equipment checkouts against what I'd seen in the jungle. Something wasn't adding up. Too many missing files, too many lost transmissions, and one name that kept surfacing where it shouldn't. Orion Systems, defense contractor, known for drone telemetry and experimental AI support. They weren't supposed to be part of our mission, but their name appeared on 3 supply crates I remembered hauling through the brush. I hadn't noticed it then, but now it felt like a breadcrumb. Then one night, my laptop pinged. Anonymous sender, encrypted message. Look deeper into Orion Systems. No signature, no introduction. Just those 6 words and a single PDF file. Inside, data logs, radio fragments, encrypted code strings, satellite positioning timestamps, every one of them lined up with the ambush. But what stopped my heart, what made me physically recoil from the screen, was the phrase printed across the header. Live field variable, test subject team Hallard. They hadn't just let us walk into a trap. They'd sent us there, on purpose. We weren't soldiers. We were data points, a live experiment to test predictive drone mapping under chaotic enemy resistance. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the footage again, listened to old comms, read every line of that PDF until my eyes blurred. And when the sun came up, I went to Foster. Not because I trusted anyone, but because if I kept this to myself, it would swallow me whole. I remember the look on his face as I handed him that USB. He didn't say a word for nearly a minute, just stared at the tiny device as if it were ticking. Finally, he looked at me. "You sure about what you're doing?" he asked. I nodded. "No turning back after this," he said. I know, and I did. Because turning back meant pretending the screams in that jungle were just noise, that the blood on my uniform was just circumstance, that my scars were just the cost of war. But they weren't. They were proof. Proof that we were betrayed before we ever hit the ground. The fallout came quickly. Not the kind you see in movies. No explosions, no arrests, just rumors and silence. My requests were blocked. My credentials flagged. Colleagues stopped looking me in the eye. Command stopped returning my calls. And then came the stories. Online, on base. She cracked. She's obsessed. Her father warned us. That one cut deepest, because it meant he knew. Or at least he knew enough. And instead of standing beside me, he stepped in front of me to stop me. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because of the scars, but because of the rage. Not hot, not loud, but quiet, cold, constant. And it burned deeper than the shrapnel. Because no matter what they said, no matter how they tried to bury it, I knew the truth. We were betrayed, and I wasn't going to let that truth die in the silence they built around me. Not even if it meant losing everything. The nights were the worst, not because of the pain, Not even the nightmares, but because of the weight of silence. The silence of command, of systems, of people who knew and chose not to speak. I stopped counting how many doors I knocked on, how many requests I filed, how many missing logs I asked to see again. Every time I pushed, I was told to rest, to be proud, to move on. But I couldn't move on from the jungle, because it hadn't let go of me. Not physically, my ribs still flared when I bent too fast, but deeper, like a wire still wrapped around my lungs. I started small. Old manifests, time logs, personnel transfers. None of it gave me what I needed, until I got to the drone maintenance records. That's where I saw it again. Orion Systems. Their names stamped next to equipment we never trained with, next to models I had never seen in any briefing. I flagged the files, clipped them, encrypted them on a private drive I kept hidden under the floorboard of my quarters. Every time I touched it, it felt heavier, like it knew what it contained. A week later, I saw Foster again. I didn't go through command. I didn't file an appointment. I waited near the observation deck until he came off shift, and I stepped out from the shadows. "Lieutenant Morgan," he said, surprised but not angry. "I didn't waste time. I need your help, but not as a superior, as someone who still believes in the truth." He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He led me to a side office, one without cameras. He shut the door and locked it. When he turned back to me, he nodded. "Talk." I laid everything out. The USB, the logs, the drone files, the ghost timestamps. He scrolled through the data with a slow, methodical expression. I watched his brow furrow, his lips pressed tight. Then he saw it, the 25-minute deployment gap, the cut audio, the satellite feed that jumped 40 minutes forward with no explanation. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "This wasn't bad intel," he said. "This was erased intel." I nodded, and someone made sure no one asked why. We spent hours that night, cross-referencing mission timestamps, double-checking chain of command approvals, and matching signature chains. And then the pattern appeared. General Harris, advisor, old friend of my father. He had signed off on the operation. "Is it possible," I whispered, "that someone knew this mission was compromised before it started?" Foster didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled up the approval logs. There it was, Harris's name. But what chilled me more, another signature buried deeper in the contract tied to Orion Systems. I zoomed in. I read it once, twice, and my stomach dropped. Colonel Daniel Morgan, my father. I didn't say a word. Foster saw it too. His lips parted, but no sound came. "He signed off on the technology years ago," Foster muttered. "This doesn't prove intent, just involvement." "But what if he knew what it had become?" I asked, voice cracking. I felt the ache build behind my ribs. It wasn't just the shrapnel this time. It was the possibility that the man who taught me to fight had sent me to die. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, playing back every conversation I'd had with my father in the weeks before that mission. The way he looked at me, the way he warned me, without warmth, not every order is meant to be questioned. The way he said, "Don't mess this up." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. And suddenly it felt like he knew. 2 days later, another message arrived. Anonymous. Again. No sender, just a line in the subject. This was never about failure. It was a test. Attached was a zip file, encrypted, time-stamped with the exact night of the ambush. I scanned it, triple-checked it for malware, then opened it. Inside were fragments of intercepted transmissions, call logs, drone telemetry overlays, and one single audio file. Its name made my blood run cold. Test drone debrief, subject Hallard. I clicked play. A man's voice filled my headphones, shaky, frantic. "If you're hearing this, you need to know the truth. I worked for Orion Systems. I was part of the project that monitored your mission. You weren't compromised by chance. You were bait. They fed false intel to your command to see how well the new algorithm could adjust under real-time enemy resistance. You weren't just soldiers. You were test variables, live data." I tried to object. When I saw the casualty reports, I said something. They told me, "Losses are acceptable." That's when I quit. But before I left, I saved this. I paused the recording, my hands trembling. Bile rose in my throat. We weren't ambushed. We were studied. Our screams, our bleeding, our survival. All of it had been measured, and someone had called it acceptable. I forwarded the file to Admiral Foster. No explanation, just a single subject line. "This changes everything." He called me less than 3 minutes later. His voice was tight, grim. "This is it," he said. "The proof we needed." He was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, as if tasting the weight of every word, "Orion turned your mission into a weapons test. This isn't incompetence, Talia. This is criminal." But it wasn't just Orion. It was everyone who signed the dotted line that allowed them into our chain of command. And I knew where I had to go next. I drove to my father's house. Same driveway, same flag out front, same polished boots lined at the door. He opened it wearing a gray undershirt. His expression was guarded. Not cold, just unreadable. "Dad," I said, "we need to talk." We sat in his study. The room was full of medals, photos, framed honors. But it suddenly felt like a museum of silence. I didn't waste time. I found the Orion files, the approval signatures, yours, Harris's, the test language. He didn't blink, but his jaw clenched. I pressed on. "Did you know they were using us? Did you know what they turned my mission into?" He turned to the bookshelf behind me. His voice came low, controlled. "War isn't clean, Talia. Compromises are made. Not all of them can be undone." I stared at him. "That's not an answer," I said. "That's a dodge." He said nothing. And in that silence, I understood. He didn't have to pull the trigger. He just had to look away while someone else did. Maybe he didn't know the full plan. Maybe he believed the tech was harmless. Maybe he trusted the system the way I once trusted him. But now men were dead. My team. My brothers. And he had helped open the door. I stood. "I'm going to find out how deep this goes," I said. "With or without you." He didn't stop me. Didn't argue. Didn't call after me. Just sat in that chair. Motionless. Like the weight of his silence had finally caught up to him. When I got back to base, I didn't hesitate. I compiled everything. The radio logs. The timestamps. The whistleblower's audio. Drone overlays. Even photos of my scars timestamped from the field hospital. Each file felt like a weapon. A truth they couldn't erase this time. By dawn, I had encrypted the full drive and walked it straight into Admiral Foster's office. His eyes met mine. "You've made up your mind," he said. I nodded. "We take it to the military council," I said. "No more back doors, no more delay." He didn't argue. Just opened a secure line. And everything that had been buried was about to be unearthed. The tribunal chamber was colder than I remembered. No jungle heat, no gunfire. Just polished wood, blinking red lights on recorders, and the weight of truth waiting to be heard. I stood beside Admiral Foster, the encrypted drive in my palm like a loaded weapon. The council was seated, 7 high-ranking officers and legal advisors, their expressions carved from stone. "Lieutenant Morgan," one of them said, "you may begin. No ceremony, no buffer, just go." I walked to the podium. My boots echoed through the room. I inserted the drive, and the screen behind me lit up. I started with the timeline. "Official deployment, 2100 hours," I said. Click. "Real boots on ground, 2035. Click. "Missing comm logs, 2110 to 2145. Click. The drone footage appeared. Thermal scans. Overlays. Then the words, highlighted in stark red. "Live field evaluation. Subject, Hallard Unit." Gasps rippled across the chamber. I didn't stop. "The audio file you're about to hear is from a former Orion engineer. He sent it anonymously, but the metadata matches Orion's encrypted communications log." I hit play. The engineer's voice echoed across the room. "You weren't compromised by chance. You were bait. They told me the casualties were acceptable. You were variables." By the time the audio cut out, the silence in the room was suffocating. One of the council members finally spoke. "Lieutenant Morgan, are you alleging that Orion Systems knowingly orchestrated a live fire test using your unit without consent?" I didn't blink. "I'm not alleging. I'm showing you." That's when I felt it. Not relief, not victory, but the wall starting to push back. A man in a dark suit stood. Orion's legal counsel. He walked slowly to the center of the chamber. "With all due respect," he said, voice calm but sharp, "these claims are emotional, speculative, based on circumstantial data and anonymous sources." He turned to the council. "Lieutenant Morgan's injuries and trauma are undeniable, but this isn't evidence of intent. This is the aftermath of a battlefield." I wanted to scream, but Foster beat me to it. He stepped forward. His voice was cold. "We have raw data, timestamps, radio silences, deleted logs. And now we have this engineer's testimony." He stared down Orion's lawyer. "You scrubbed the heart of this mission and thought no one would find the scar tissue." The man didn't respond. but the cracks had started to show. When the hearing adjourned that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't in months. Hope. Real hope. As we walked out of the chamber, Foster turned to me. "You did good," he said. I nodded. I believed we had finally turned the tide. I was wrong. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Calls, messages, emails. Headlines were everywhere. Lieutenant Morgan, hero or liability? Sources say she disobeyed direct protocol. High-level official claims emotional instability influenced mission failure. I stared at the screen, my pulse thundering. This was a hit piece, a deliberate smear campaign. Orion was pushing back, and they weren't aiming for the truth. They were aiming for me. Then I saw it. The quote, the one that hollowed me out. "My daughter is obsessed. She's letting her trauma distort her judgment. She's not stable enough for command." Retired Colonel Daniel Morgan. My knees buckled. I sat on the edge of my bunk, staring at the glowing screen. I read the words over and over, hoping they'd rearrange into something else. They didn't. He hadn't just doubted me. He had joined them. I didn't leave my quarters for 12 hours. Didn't eat. Didn't speak. Just sat there staring at the wall. The screen had long gone dark, but the words burned into my memory. Obsessed. Unstable. Not to be trusted. Coming from a stranger, I could have fought back. But from him, from the man who taught me never to show weakness, it felt like he had aimed for the one place left unscarred and split it wide open. The whispers started that same day, in the mess hall. She snapped, you know. Didn't she lead them right into enemy fire? Wasn't her dad the one who warned command? I didn't respond, didn't defend myself. I just walked through it, stone-faced, but bleeding inside. No one met my eyes. Not anymore. I trained alone. I ate alone. Even Ruiz, still recovering off base, had stopped texting. I couldn't blame him. The narrative had shifted. Orion had made sure of it. I was no longer the survivor. I was now a problem. A PR crisis in uniform. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. The same mirror I had once avoided after the hospital. I lifted my shirt. The scars were still there, twisting across my ribs like burnt rope. But this time I didn't flinch. I traced them with my fingers, and I whispered their names. Diaz, Kim, Ruiz, Alvarez. They weren't just scars. They were stories, and no amount of PR spin or legalese would erase what we lived through. I walked to my desk, opened the encrypted file again. Every log, every missing minute, every intercepted call, laid out like a map of betrayal. I stared at it, then whispered out loud, "You can burn my name. You can twist the story, but I have the truth, and I'm not done." The next morning, I walked into Admiral Foster's office. He didn't look surprised, didn't ask if I was okay. He just nodded. "They're scared," he said. I nodded back. Good, because beneath all the pain, beneath the smear campaign, beneath the sting of my father's public betrayal, was a fire. Small, quiet, but growing. I wasn't done. Not even close. That night, I sat by myself under the open sky near the far end of base, where the lights didn't reach. The stars above were sharp, distant. I pressed a hand to my ribs, felt the metal, the pain, the proof, and I made myself a promise. If they want war, I'll give them the kind they can't script, the kind they can't scrub from the record, the kind that leaves them branded, just like me. Then I stood, alone, but no longer silent. The hearing room inside the Pentagon was a different kind of battlefield. No camouflage, no rifles. Just dark suits, legal briefs, and eyes that never blinked. This time, it wasn't a military tribunal. It was bigger. A congressional ethics panel. Representatives from defense. A row of officers. And across from me, Orion Systems' senior executive team. 4 men in tailored suits. Calm, polished, dead-eyed. I sat beside Admiral Foster. My scars were hidden under uniform fabric. But the weight of them? It was in every breath I took. The session opened with a firm voice. "We are here to review allegations of mission tampering, illegal experimentation, and falsification of combat records by Orion Systems and cooperating officers in the chain of command." I stood when they called my name. They told me to speak. So I did. My name is Lieutenant Talia Morgan. I led Recon Unit Hallard on what was described as a routine extraction mission. What we walked into was a kill zone, not due to bad intel, but because we were being studied, monitored, measured. Treated like disposable data points by a contractor running live field trials. and by a system that let them. A murmur rolled through the room. One of Orion's lawyers immediately stood. "Objection, this is character testimony, not confirmed fact. These are allegations, not verified data." Admiral Foster rose. His voice? Steel. "We've confirmed missing comms windows, tampered timestamps, wiped telemetry records. And now, a direct confession from an Orion engineer." He laid the file folder on the table like it was a loaded pistol. "And we're not done." We plugged in the USB. The screens lit up. I stepped to the projector as data appeared behind me. Timestamp overlays, drone flight logs, satellite heat maps. I pointed to a red spike in the telemetry feed. This was the moment our comms dropped. The same moment drone tracking spiked. We were being followed in real time. Click. Next screen, Orion's project notes. Redacted, but readable. Control variable, recon Hillard. Objectives, evasion, extraction, and chaos response mapping. The room fell still. Someone coughed. A paper shuffled, and I saw it. Sweat on the temple of one of Orion's senior advisors. Then came the voice I hadn't expected to hear. Firm, direct. From the Council's lead ethics officer. "We've reviewed the contracting documents tied to this mission's pre-authorization. There is a signature here we need clarified." He looked up, straight toward the first row. "Colonel Daniel Morgan, your name appears on the approval forms for Orion's drone testing protocol. Can you confirm this?" The entire room turned. I did too. My father sat frozen, hands tight on his knees, jaw clenched. He didn't speak. Not for 5 seconds. Then, yes. His voice was low, strained. "I signed off on the initial tech contract. I was told it was for simulation purposes only. Training models, not live combat integration." A wave moved through the room. Even Foster looked momentarily stunned, but I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stared at the man who had raised me to obey the chain of command, and now sat in the middle of the chain that broke it. Another council member leaned forward. "Colonel Morgan, did you at any point know your daughter's team was selected as the control group for this experiment?" He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. His voice cracked. "I didn't know, and I didn't want this." I don't remember sitting down. I just remember the sound of my pulse in my ears, and the look in my father's eyes, not cold, not cruel, but shattered, like he had finally heard everything I hadn't said. Foster didn't let the silence last. He stood slowly, pulled a sealed folder from his briefcase, and placed it on the table with both hands. His voice was sharp, controlled. "We've obtained a declassified memo from Orion's internal R&D department. It references Operation Hillard, and it uses terms like live field evaluation, control variable, real-time combat response modeling." He opened the folder and handed a copy to the panel, and then he said it. Lieutenant Morgan's unit wasn't just observed. They were chosen, targeted, used knowingly as the variable in a combat algorithm test. The room went still. One of Orion's executives stood so fast his chair nearly tipped. "That memo is out of context," he snapped. A theoretical framework, not an execution order. But Foster didn't flinch. "Then explain why it references Unit Hallard by name. Coordinates match the drop zone. Time matches the deleted 40-minute block from the official report." The executive opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His colleagues shifted uncomfortably. One rubbed his forehead. Another pulled at his collar. And for the first time since this nightmare began, they looked afraid. I stepped forward. Not asked, not prompted. I just moved to the center of the room and spoke. Not loud, but with purpose. "You called us variables, control subjects, real-time indicators of battlefield stress. But we were people. We bled. We screamed. We carried each other through hell. And you watched, as if it were a simulation." I turned toward the Orion table. Their eyes didn't meet mine. Not anymore. "You scrubbed the data. You falsified the report. You erased 40 minutes of agony because you knew it would damn you." Then I turned toward the council. Every word I spoke came from somewhere deeper than memory, from a place that had never healed. I've carried shrapnel in my ribs for over a year. You know what hurts more? The knowledge that my pain was an acceptable risk to someone who wanted cleaner data. I paused, let the weight settle, and finished. My team wasn't a test. We were soldiers. We were loyal. And we were betrayed. The silence was thick. No pen scratches, no chair creaks, just breath and consequence. Then the lead councilwoman spoke. "Lieutenant Morgan, what would justice look like to you?" I looked her straight in the eye. Justice means they never do this again. Not to another unit. Not to another soldier. Not under the name of innovation. We need oversight. We need a clause. Something binding. Call it what you want. But I call it the Callahan Clause. Foster stepped beside me. He placed a copy of the draft policy on the table. His voice was calm but heavy. It requires all future missions involving experimental tech to pass a field veteran review board. It prohibits private contractors from conducting live tests without full informed consent of the operating unit. And it enforces live data transparency, so what happened to Unit Hallard can never happen again. The panel said nothing. They just nodded, one by one. As I left the room, I didn't look back at the Orion table. I didn't need to. Their silence was all the confirmation I needed. For months, they had controlled the story. Today, I took it back. 1 month after the hearings, I stood at the edge of Fort Brigham for the last time. No marching drills, no whispered judgments, no polished boots pacing behind me. Just quiet. I wasn't in uniform anymore. I had signed my discharge papers the moment the council ratified the Callahan Clause. It passed unanimously. The language was clear, seared into official record. No private entity shall engage in real-time combat experimentation without full disclosure and explicit consent from every member of the deployed unit. And right there, printed in black ink, was the name. Private First Class Marcus Callahan. He would never know what he started. But we made damn sure it would end with him. I took slow steps toward the barracks. My old bunk was still there. Sheets folded, footlocker closed. On the desk sat an envelope. No stamp, no base markings. Just my name, Talia. The handwriting was tight, rigid, familiar. My father's. I sat down slowly and opened it. Talia, you have every reason to hate me. Every reason to never speak to me again. I'm not writing to justify. I'm writing because silence is a coward's language, and I've been silent for far too long. I failed you. I believed in the system for so long that I forgot who it was meant to protect. When you told me what happened in Hallard, I didn't want to believe you. Not because I doubted you, but because if I believed you, I had to admit that I helped build the machine that broke you. My hands trembled, but I kept reading. I said things publicly that hurt you. Not because I wanted to discredit you, but because I was afraid. If you were right, then everything I've stood for, everything I've signed, would be soaked in blood. But then I saw you stand in front of that council, steady, unshaking, with scars on your body and fire in your voice. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was proud, not because you're my daughter, but because you became something I never had the courage to be, a fire starter, a disruptor, a soldier who wouldn't let the silence win. I folded the letter slowly, set it on the desk. Then I sat there for a long time, letting the silence fill the room like water, not drowning me this time, just holding me, letting me float. 3 days later, I left the base. No ceremony, no send-off, no flag-folded salutes, just Admiral Foster waiting at the gate. He extended his hand. "You're leaving with more than you came with," he said. I smiled, barely. "A few more scars," I said. "And a name they won't forget," he replied. He handed me a small wooden box. Inside was the original Hallard unit insignia. The edges were cracked, the paint chipped, but it was whole, just like me. I moved to a small town up north, quiet, snowy in the winters, forgettable on a map, which was perfect. No one asked what happened to my leg, or why I sometimes woke up screaming. I taught self-defense at a community center, teenagers mostly, sometimes veterans who didn't want to be called that. I never talked about Hallard, but some nights I'd see one of them struggling to make eye contact with themselves in the mirror, and I'd tell them, "You're still here, that's enough." Every morning, I looked at the same wall in my apartment. It had 2 things on it. 1, a framed copy of the Callahan Clause, the original stamped version. 2, a photograph, not of me, of my team, Ruiz, Kim, Alvarez, and Callahan front and center, squinting at the sun like it owed him something. We weren't smiling, but we were whole. Before the mission, before the breach, before the data turned us into variables, I talked to that photo sometimes, when the world got too loud or too quiet. "Still got your 6, I'd say, and I meant it. Letters came, from time to time. Foster. Ruiz, now in Texas, raising 2 boys. Even a postcard from one of the council members, unsigned, with a single sentence, "You were right." One afternoon, I got a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They wanted me to speak at a training seminar on combat trauma and contractor oversight. I almost said no, but then I remembered something Ruiz told me after he testified. They called you crazy, but you made them listen. So I said yes. The auditorium was small, not a fancy one, mostly low-level officers and caseworkers. When they introduced me, I didn't talk about my rank or medals. I walked up to the podium and just started, "My name is Talia Morgan. I was part of Unit Hallard. We were betrayed, not by the enemy, but by the silence." I told them about Callahan, the deleted logs, the way it felt to hear yourself labeled a data point. And then I said, "You think war breaks people, but it's not war that breaks us. It's coming home and realizing no one wants to hear the truth." There was no applause when I finished, just silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was listening. That night, back in my apartment, I stood in front of the photo again. The snow fell gently outside. I touched the glass frame, then whispered, "I told them, Marcus." They finally heard us. Because sometimes justice isn't a court ruling or a front-page headline. Sometimes justice is a woman with a limp, a scarred torso, and a steady voice who refuses to let the truth die quietly.